Pests beware, your fields have heroes. The Pests and Predators podcast is brought to you by Field Heroes and is powered by the Western Grains Research Foundation. Learn how beneficial insects fight pests and protect your crops. Visit fieldheroes.ca today.
It is Ann Wasko, the Gateway Livestock Exchange, for this week's Beef Market Update. Ann, how are you doing?
Good day. I'm great, Shaun.
You never use the wrong applicator on the ranch, do you?
Never. Let's just stop.
I didn't realize how there's a lot of people that are using the wrong applicator, and it's a big deal. So encourage everybody to go to the website retentionmatters.ca. Okay, Ann.
Wow.
Steamy, hot. Like, we're getting into some warm temperatures. And it's not just the barometer that's gone up. It is also the cattle markets. What is at work here?
Well, we certainly are in some more new price high territory this week on both sides of the border. So that's exciting news. I look at the calendar, of course, and I wonder, are we getting close to that top? But let's talk about what happened this week. So in the South, Texas, Kansas, we were $3 higher again. So 218 to 221 live. In the North, the Nebraska live markets were 225 to 228. So that's going to be called anywhere from $3 to $5 higher than last week. Dressed 352 to 360 delivered. Those are US dollars, yes.
Wow.
And that's $4 to $8 higher than last week. So just an amazing run as we continue to chop at new levels. Timing on the calendar is about right, as I mentioned, but certainly these levels are higher than I think many of us thought. Although some of these target areas that we're at now are kind of, if you were looking at the technicals, we're getting really close to those targets for highs.
Now, like the prices in the last week, they're not impacting prices on Canadian long weekend in May or Memorial Day. That beef was bought quite a while ago, correct?
Correct. Demand has been solid. So again, that choice cutout that we keep watching. The kills have been off. You know, we've seen packers with their losses dropping their kills. And so some support to the cutout was expected. It was a little slow in coming, but this week we saw the choice cutout close almost $5 higher than last week. So 347.90. Again, this is that time period from a demand perspective as we head into that grilling season. So all of this is part and parcel. Demand is strong. Prices are up, supporting certainly these higher cash cattle prices. So the other big jump was on the select product. We talk a lot about the choice product. Select jumped $9. So choice was up $5 and the select was up $9 this week. So it's strong on all cuts.
Yeah, on those the choice select spread. I had a listener email out somebody from outside the beef business who had said, why don't you report the Canadian numbers? And the reason is that we don't have them. So that's the simplest way to
good call. Now, I'll just before we leave prices, let me just finish on the local market because we keep making new levels as far as new highs here in Alberta. So the fat cattle market on a dress basis here this week was up $3. Dressed $4.90 to $4.93 delivered. Feedlots are really basically into their calf fed, so those lighter type carcass weights, and that's showing up in the data. Last week's steer weight nationally and here in Canada was 905 pounds. That's 11 pounds below this same week last year and 16 pounds below that 5-year average. So we talked about this a couple weeks ago, but the numbers keep coming down. That's certainly helping to shore up that drop in production. Fed cattle production in Canada is actually down 10% from a tonnage perspective this year. Last year when we talked about it, the kill wasn't much different, but carcass weights were up 25, 30 pounds, right? So that all those pieces all come together to talk about tonnage. So just wanted to make those points.
Yeah. StatsCan put out some data regarding live cattle exports. What did that show us?
Okay, so Shaun, this is March data. I want to be really clear because here we are into May and sometimes that delay kind of catches us. We knew March was super busy. If you recall, that was right ahead of that April 2nd tariff announcement, unknown announcement date. So March was busy. This is the data from StatsCan that confirms what we all saw happening at the border crossings in Western Canada. So fed cattle exports in March, so fat cattle going straight to packing plants in the U.S. were up 21%. For that whole first quarter of this year, we're up 32%. So about 158,000 head of fat cattle went south in that first quarter. On the feeder cattle side, and we knew this was busy. We don't normally, not in recent years, we haven't sent many feeder cattle south, but we were 3 times what we sent in March of last year. So 300%. So Q1, when you do Jan, Feb, March, 163% increase. That's about 58,000 feeders went south in that first quarter. So a busy one. Cow exports were also up 10% in March. So you say, what went south? My answer is basically everything.
Everything did. Now, the ramifications of those numbers later on in the year, does that mean the back end of the year we're going to have to pull a bunch of feeder cattle north? Like, what will we be watching there, or does it just doesn't really matter?
We will be watching the feeder cattle imports closely. We know in the last few years that's been the only way Western Canadian feedlots have been able to fill pens.
Yeah.
So that will be a key. Do they fill the pens? They'll have to use imports to do it, I suspect. Or do we see some pens go empty? And speaking of pens, Canfax will release their May 1 report this afternoon. So that's the cattle on feed report for Alberta and Saskatchewan. When you say based on what we've done in the first quarter and April, I think it's my guesstimate for this afternoon's report is to see those on feed numbers continue to drop. April 1 was down 4%, just as a reminder. So we'll drop. And I also expect April placements to be down because after we've sent so many cattle south, things have just gotten really quiet.
So pen utilization down.
Correct. Yeah. So I think we'll see that. I think we'll see that show up in the data. And the other kind of supporting factor to this discussion is what's going on, or maybe I should say what's not going on at Alberta auction markets. So now that we've kind of finished up the month of April data, we can talk about how many cattle didn't move through markets in the month of April, down 38% from last year. But it wasn't just 1 month. March was down 16%. We've been so busy on the export front that it was really quiet through the markets. So I know it was erratic through the first quarter, some weeks big, some weeks small, but when the dust all settles, our auction market volumes are way off the mark.
And just to circle back on this, so we saw those liners, like, you know, you stop at a Flying J or some other truck stop, there were cattle liners like crazy. You'd see them going on Highway 3 towards British Columbia, down to Coots as well. So we saw the liners on the highway. So these numbers confirm that. And this is all related to those, you know, the Trump tariffs, threats of tariffs, the uncertainty that all that had created.
Yeah. So the word we're using now, I guess, when we talk about this is front loading, right? So it was all in an unknown anticipation of what might happen. In hindsight, you know, it didn't materialize the way some thought, but nevertheless, producers made those actions ahead of time.
So some people be asking, okay, so we saw a pretty good increase there of live cattle going south to be slaughtered and harvested in the U.S. Was there that much access kill hook space that like, how did that all, like, what didn't happen because of that?
Well, certainly because we're talking about the size in the Pacific Northwest in terms of harvest capacity, and again, tighter supplies pretty much everywhere. I do think, you know, especially for that period of time. And remember, our basis levels were well back in the U.S., so the cattle were good value, even though they were great prices for us as Canadians. For a U.S. packer, I think they would be looked at as good value. So you find a place to harvest good value.
Talking to some of the farmers that are, you know, getting going with seeding here, and it's off to a pretty good pace across Western Canadian prairies. A lot of that's because of how dry it is. We're going to get this crop out of the ground, and farmers, ranchers alike, we need some rain.
Yeah, and grass and hay, we know for those of us on the ranching side, you need that early moisture, and of course that is very much lacking. So we're going to need some real timely moisture here, PDQ.
Before Canada, like for the pasture, we really need to get that before the heat really comes in July, correct?
Yeah, Like where I live, there's not much in terms of grass that grows in July.
Yeah,
it's got to happen before that. Yeah,
Mother Nature, you hear that? Now. Hey, Ann, have yourself a great weekend. Really do appreciate it.
Thanks, Shaun. You too.